I'm Angela and welcome to my symposium live stream now. How are you guys? I can see some of you there. Joao and Andrew and Jenny and Sarah and Cipriano and Ryan. Hi Ryan and hi David. Really nice to see you all guys here. Today we will be talking about the disenchantment and re-enchantment of the word. I'm pretty curious to know whether any of you has ever heard of these terms, because they are quite buzzwords in academia, but I realized that outside of the academic world, and that is why I have this YouTube channel among the many reasons, I want to bridge the gap between, the academic world and the world of practitioners, so that you know what is going on there, what is it we are researching, and perhaps that can help you and provide you with some new tools to navigate your own practice, or if you're only interested in the theoretical aspect of it, you can still find benefits, hopefully. So let me show you the PowerPoint now. Can you hear me okay? Hopefully you can. So as I said, today we will be talking about the disenchantment and re-enchantment of the word. And yeah, the things that we will be covering in today's lecture, today's live stream, are first we will try to define the term disenchantment, where the term comes from. As I said, it is a very known term among scholars in religious studies, not only scholars that study paganism and magic or magic practicing religions or esotericism as I do, but also religious studies scholars in general. So we will see where the term disenchantment comes from and what does it mean. Then, is disenchantment linked to secularism? And then we will tackle a scholar that says that disenchantment is actually a myth. So we will see what that means. And then how another scholar has problematized disenchantment. And then at the end, we will have a question time. So when you want to ask questions, because hopefully you will be interacting with yourselves as well. But when you want to ask a direct question to me, please start with question in a caps lock and then add your question. That way, it makes it much easier for me to answer your to detect them in the chat. And if I don't manage to answer your question, please leave them in the comment section, and I will definitely answer them afterwards. So let's start now. So the term disenchantment, actually the the sentence, the phrase disenchantment of the word, this concept comes from Max Weber. Max Weber, he's a philosopher, sociologist of religion. He's a quite interesting figure and an interesting scholar, especially in the study of modernity and capitalism and many things really. But he is quite interesting because he finds, even for example in capitalism, some religious elements. So Max Weber says, in an attempt to explain modernity, because he was trying to explain modernity and try to identify the key features of it, one of the key features that he identifies is this one. So let's see the term in context. Thus, increasing intellectualization and rationalization does not mean increasing general knowledge of the conditions under which we live our lives. It means something else. It means the knowledge or belief that if we only wanted to, we could learn at any time that there are, in principle, no mysterious, unpredictable forces in play, but that all things, in principle, can be controlled through calculation. This, however, means the disenchantment of the word. No longer, like the savage, who believed that such forces existed, do we have to resort to magical means to gain control over or pray to the spirits. Technical means and calculation work for us instead. This, above all, is what intellectualization actually means. So for Max Weber, the disenchantment of the word is one of the features of modernity, of our modern society. The idea that slowly but surely we have, at large in the Western society, this is mainly in reference to the Western world, we have abandoned the idea that the world is full of spirits and hidden forces. Everything becomes rational in a very strict sense, in the sense that everything becomes calculable. You can measure things, and you can navigate the world by calculating things and expecting that the world will act according to certain laws which natural science is able to study and uncover. This idea of disenchantment, this aspect of modernity, of extreme rationalization, of a very, intense rationalization, and the idea that everything is to be calculated and you can predict things according to, the systems and the methods of natural science and measurability of things, is the disenchantment. Interestingly, in literature and in scholarship, this idea of disenchantment has been often linked to the idea of secularization. So, if the world is disenchanted, if you don't have hidden forces and spirits anymore, that means that it is also that we are also moving towards a secular age, and that has been also argued by several scholars up until recently, to be the case, whether or not this was associated with the disenchantment of the word by Weber. But as I said, it is quite a buzzword in academia, and usually it tended to be associated. Then we have the idea of re-enchantment. Re-enchantment is used especially among those who study Western esotericism, in pagan studies, in the study of magic practicing traditions. And re-enchantment is sort of gives you the idea of this rupture, or this, this change, this turning point where the disenchantment of the word stops, and then you have a re-enchantment of the word. So slowly and progressively, you have that there are more and more traditions that start seeing, and even people, people that start believing in spirits again, and start believing that you can in fact affect reality through hidden forces, and not just by using your five senses and applying the laws of natural science or natural physics. So this is what we mean in the scholarly word when we refer to this re-enchantment. And it is linked to the revival and rebirth of pagan traditions, for example, as well as secret societies. So usually it tends to be referred to the the late 19th century to the 20th century and onwards. There are few key theoretical concepts that underlie this idea of disenchantment and then re-enchantment of the word. One of these, and we will see this will be challenged by other scholars that I will be talking about later. One of these is history as progress. So the idea that history is also linear. So the idea that history is kind of a line that goes from worse to better, and that history also equals progress. And this is something that it is sort of still embedded in our cultural discourse even. For example, we say that someone is ahead of his or her time to mean that the person is progressive, and that the future is going in a certain direction that that person is already kind of moving towards. And this underlies the idea that we see history in terms of progress. And one of the philosophers that talks of history in this sense is Hegel, but he's not the only one. Clearly, it is something that perhaps goes back to uh, well, I think it is quite. It is present across the Western, the history of Western philosophy. But this idea that you have history as a progress that goes from worse to better, and so that everything that is behind us is more, primitive. Now, it is not a word that we use anymore in scholarship, nor in um, language, I think. This idea that things in the past were less progressive, more outdated, and whereas everything that is present now is better than what it was yesterday, and in the future what expects us is something that is even better. So you have this progress, this idea of history as progress. Then you have the idea that disenchantment correlates to secularism. So, if there is no magic or hidden forces at play in reality, that means that there is also decline in religion or religiosity, and also the decline of magic that is linked, as I said, to the decline of religion, and that we have this re-enchantment as a turning point and as a shift, as a cultural shift, a paradigm shift, even from the 20th century. Now let's see what Josephson Storm says. This is a quite famous book, at least among religious studies scholars, and it is called The Myth of Disenchantment. And here, Dr. Storm addresses the matter of disenchantment and says, well, actually, that is not really what was going on. Because first he says disenchantment is not the same as secularism. So disenchantment doesn't really mean that we are getting less religious, but just that the way the society at large sees and articulates its culture you know, may have gone through some changes. Disenchantment for Storm is a myth. Some kind of magic has always been practiced. So, one of the things that he says is that history has been quite selective when it comes to describing what was going on. So, for example, we know Isaac Newton from the laws of gravity, but we don't know. We you know Unless you have a specific interest, you wouldn't know that Newton was perhaps more interested in alchemy and other esoteric matters than he was in the natural laws of physics. So there was an interest there, and even with Descartes and with most of the philosophers and scholars and scientists that we would associate to a very rational era, they quite often also had an interest in magic or related topics, but that didn't quite register in history, if that makes sense. In that it is part of a, I wouldn't say hidden history, but it's not the history that gets popularized. And so, unless you have a specific interest, that is not the kind of narrative of history that you will get. And then also we have the study. This is another thing that religious studies scholars are very much aware of, and that is that there is an increasing study of the nuns, as they are called, the non-religious people, because there are different countries in the Western world where now those who identify as non-religious have become, quite a big chunk of society. And so there are now scholars who are trying to understand what these non-religious people actually believe. And among these, there is Christopher Cotter and Linda Houdet, for example, to name a few. But yeah, this is now something that has been subject of study for religious studies scholars. And what they realize when they dive deeper is that people who identify as non-religious do not, I mean, it's not like they don't hold religious beliefs. Sometimes they would define themselves as spiritual, or they would say, I'm not religious, but I believe in astrology or other kinds of things. So it tends to be more difficult than just saying these people are non-religious, and it seems more the case that these people do not identify with a certain dogmatic idea of religion linked to the Judeo-Christian model, and rather they hold different beliefs that they often would define as spiritual rather than religious. But it's not like they don't believe in anything. Many, as I said, so many of those we associate with the scientific revolution saw themselves as magicians, and the early Enlightenment project was a quest for a divine science. This is drawn from the myth of disenchantment by Storm. Yet attempts to demonize magic and enchant natural philosophy, in the attempt to do that, superstition began shifting from being a Christian term to being a reference to beliefs in direct conflict with the scientific worldview. So you have here more a conflict, perhaps, of paradigms rather than the idea of a disenchantment of the word. Rather, disenchanting word in which magic is embattled and it intermittently contained within its own cultural sphere, but not a disenchanted one in which magic is gone. So it is more a disenchanting word, according to Storm, in which magic, is still contained, but it is in a conflict with the dominant cultural paradigm. But yeah, it is still contained within the cultural milieu, even in cases where there may appear to be a conflict. Modernity is for Storm also a myth, he would say. If you read his book, he will kind of call out as myths quite a few things that we hold for granted. One of these is also modernity. So you have the idea of modernity, and one of the main characterizations of modernity is the disenchantment of the word. And he challenges both the idea that the word ever got disenchanted. He says that actually it didn't. In never there was never a time, according to Storm, where magic was not part of culture and of what some people believed. Not necessarily everyone, but still a significant percentage of the population. So he says that modernity also is a philosophy. Philosophy means a theory in philosophy that comes with a rudimentary narrative structure attached. Every time something specific is termed modern, that implies a story. First there was X, and then everything changed. So here the idea is that Storm here he's saying that both modern and disenchantment are philosophical constructions that are not really helpful because they sort of build upon the idea that we mentioned before of history as progress and history as linear, as something that has, certain moments in time. So you have the rupture, you have something called modernity, and this modernity, this little box, is full of disenchantment, or rather empty of enchantment. And then you will have the post-modernity. But he says that you don't really have that in history. You have more um, things that change, and you do have metamorphosis, but it's not as stark and it's not as linear. There are things that return and things that are never abandoned. So sometimes you utilize certain categories to make sense of what is happening, but by using those labels, you may flatten the complexity of what is actually going on, and as a consequence, you won't see the whole picture, and perhaps you will overlay over what is happening something that is not quite there to the extent that that label would suggest. So he says, we have retired the savage and eliminated superstition from our disciplinary vocabularies, but as long as to we hold to the contrasting terms, the occlusion remains. So here it is saying, if we still look at history and we still try to analyze what is happening in our culture in these terms, dividing things in little boxes and giving them labels and giving them, these attributes like disenchantment, you will still have, you will still, you will still be holding on to the idea that history is made by subsequent sections, and actually that is not the case, and according to Storm, that is detrimental to our understanding, and also it creates dichotomies which may also be, hinder our understanding. For example, if you hold the idea that history is linear and history works by progress, then what is behind you in history will always be worse, and so it will also be more primitive, even if now we don't use that vocabulary anymore. We would still have that concept in our understanding and perception of the world if we still hold on to that view of history. So interestingly, this links quite well, in my opinion, to another scholar, a sociologist of religion, called Peter Berger, who's famous for a book called The Sacred Canopy. And Peter Berger says, we don't live in a secular age, we live in a pluralist age. So for Berger came from, at first, actually, in his career, he thought that we were, in fact, living in a secular age. But then, over time and throughout his career, he changed his mind and he realized, well, actually, we don't really live in a secular age. We live in a pluralist age. So the idea that now we have of religion has completely changed, and the way we engage with religion has also changed. So, two pluralisms are found here in our society, according to Berger. The first one is that many religions and worldviews coexist in the same society. So we don't live in a society without religion. We live in a society with many religions, and many religions also come with many worldviews. This is not, however, unique to the modern era, according to Berger. What is unique to the modern time is the coexistence of the secular discourse with numerous religious discourses. This pluralism is uniquely modern and tends to accentuate the first kind, the pluralism of religions and worldviews. So, this second kind of pluralism, which means that perhaps in the past you would still have that many religions and worldviews coexist in the same society, although it was not as evident and not to the extent that we have today. But now we have the coexistence of secular discourse with numerous religious discourses. So now you can have, for example, political bodies in society which are secular, but then you have people who are not secular. They hold some kind of religious or spiritual belief. So you have this constant interaction of this plurality of discourses which engage with each other, and they create a very unique pattern, a very unique pattern of meaning making, meaning making, as we may say. And I think that even though here Berger is talking about secularism, this may be quite an interesting, theoretical tool to also understand the idea of disenchantment. Have we stopped believing magic, or perhaps the belief in magic and discourses related to magic and interpretation and magical interpretations of reality are now coexisting with secular worldviews? There are things magic practitioners would, for example, do a ritual on a Sunday or on a full moon, and then they will go to work and they will shift from a discourse, from a certain discourse and a certain way of navigating their reality that is infused with magic, to then shift, and they will be just as able to interact with reality within a secular discourse. So it is, might it be perhaps the case that that is not just what is happening with secularism, but also with magic and the idea of disenchantment or re-enchantment, or perhaps always being enchanted, um, ever enchanting. I don't know. Perhaps we should come up with a different term and write a book about it. But yeah, it is interesting because perhaps this give us an idea of the complexity. I always emphasize, both with my students and on the YouTube channel, since I focus on the academic study of these topics, that complexity is always key. When you want to find one answer to something, you can rest assured that the one answer is not the end all and be all, and that every answer can have lots of ramifications, and the more you dive deeper and you enter into the rabbit hole, the more answers and perhaps questions will arise. And there are certain questions that I might argue, are not meant to be answered, but they are just meant to direct you in a certain direction. But yeah, I find this theory by Berger interesting because this idea that we have different discourses that we interact with and different worldviews that we are navigating, sometimes they may seem to be conflicting, but are they if they are cohabitating? So, yeah, I guess food for thought. And as always, I hope to provide with theoretical tools and philosophical tools and new ways to understand things. Now, speaking of tools and understanding things, I also quite enjoyed this book by Egil Asprem called The Problem of Disenchantment. And in this book, he is problematizing the concept of disenchantment. As we saw before with the myth of disenchantment, we have the certain certain objections to as to why disenchantment doesn't work as a category. That here, Egil Asprem is kind of addressing using a different methodology. So what he says is that we need to reconceptualize disenchantment in the context of problem history. And this is a German methodology that is translated in English as problem history. And it is a methodology for intellectual and cultural history that emphasizes the contextual, situated, and embodied nature of intellectual questioning. So this is basically a method that Dr. Asprem utilizes that is not just based on understanding the concept in and of itself, but understanding the concept in terms of the problems it it lets surface. So every concept allows for certain questions to arise. And so he would say that if you only analyze the concept in and of itself, you run into the issue of it not being relevant to the given time where when you are trying to study that specific concept in context. So the idea here is that different contexts will have different problematizations and different conceptualizations of any given theory. So it is important not just to focus on the concept per se, but to focus on the questions that problem that the questions that concept kind of triggers and lets surface. Also, another positive aspect that Asprem says this methodology will allow is for synchronic analysis as opposed to a merely diachronic analysis of intellectual discourses with a primary focus on the agent level. So, synchronic means something that is here and now, that is happening here and now, whereas diachronic means something that is occurring throughout a certain length of time. So, if you try to analyze concepts just in a diachronic manner, this means that you are trying to understand them across, a length of history, whereas a synchronic understanding means an understanding here and now in the context and in the place that you are focusing on. And when a concept is not well problematized and contextualized, it is quite difficult for it to respond to the challenges of a given a current time. When, for example, the concept has been created and first conceptualized a couple of centuries ago, for instance. So conceptualizations of disenchantment as a socio-historical process affecting modern societies imply abstract top-down explanations of individual beliefs and actions. He then argues, Asprem argues, to go from a fixed social theory to a culturally situated problem field that such theories have historically emerged from and responded to. So it is kind of putting or trying to understand this concept um, in the web of interconnected cultural influences that is stemmed from. Disenchantment can thus be reconceptualized as a set of problems. So he says that the, the the disenchantment, the abandonment of the belief in magic should not be just understood as a concept throughout time as a process, but as a set of problems. And these are linked to the questions that these concepts allow to surface. So, for example, questions like, are there incalculable powers in nature or are there not? How far do our capabilities for acquiring knowledge extend? Can there be any basis for morality, value, and meaning in nature? Can religious worldviews be extrapolated from scientific facts? If no, why? If yes, how? So, in other words, what Asprem is saying here is that the problem of disenchantment can be phrased like the main features of a disenchanted world, with question marks added, where the answers are to be found in a specific time and place. So it is an interesting take, the one here by Asprem, because he says, so you have first the idea of Weber with the disenchantment. So the world has abandoned the belief in magic. Then you have other scholars say, like Peter Berger with secularism. Well, actually, we haven't abandoned religiosity or religion or the idea that the world is enchanted and magical. We have just started to um, work within multiple worldviews. We interact with discourses and understandings of the world which is secular in nature and contemporary. At the same time, we are interacting with the world in a magical way. The two things, we have not moved away from magic, we have not moved away from enchantment. We have just merged together secular discourses and magical or enchanted discourses. Then you have Storm that says disenchantment is not really something that has ever happened, because disenchantment, because even during the Enlightenment, those who are considered to be the pinnacle of natural science and the most rational scholars we know, they were still quite interested in magic and related topics. So disenchantment never really happened, and also we should abandon the idea that the word that the history moves in a linear manner and towards progress. And then with Egil Asprem, we have the idea that disenchantment is to be understood in terms of the problems or the questions that it begs, so to speak. So there are questions that certain concepts will that will trigger into a specific time and space, and depending on that specific time and space, you will need to answer those questions and as a consequence problematize that concept in relation to it. So in this case, for example, these are the questions that Asprem says the idea of disenchantment bags for our contemporary society and even for in the past. And so the answers to these questions will determine what disenchantment really means and how it articulates as a notion, as a concept within the contemporary discourse of a certain time and a certain place. So my lecturing part is over now, so I can now move on to the to your questions and see. Sorry, I can move to your questions and see uh, what are you asking. Let me go back to the beginning. Uh, yeah, I was told that the volume on my mic was low, but I I set it up as much as possible. I don't know why it is so low today. Um, so Eman, um, I can see a question. Is nominalism related to disenchantment? I can see how saying that only things really exist and abstract universals don't seems to imply materialism. That's a good question, Eman. Is nominalism related to disenchantment? Um, I think that it may be, because mm, I haven't found this in scholarship, so I cannot answer from a scholarly point of view, meaning what is in literature. But I can tell you what I think. I think that there may be a nominalistic component. Oh, thank you, Thomas, for your donation. There may be a nominalistic component in that understand, when you try to investigate disenchantment, at least in the way Weber did and in the way the scholars before Peter Berger did, it may have implied some kind of nominalism, but not necessarily. It really depends on how you conceptualize disenchantment. For example, as we saw with Storm and Asprem, and even with Peter Berger with the idea of secularism, I don't think that in that case that would apply. Andrew asks, the ancients believed in a golden age and the world was getting worse. Did the change to a progressive worldview came at the Enlightenment or was it already changing before that? That's a good question, Andrew. Um, I'm trying to think whether I read something about it. I think that it may be linked. Don't quote me on that because I'm not completely sure, but it may be linked to the advent of Christianity. Um, because in Greek philosophy, you do have a circular view of time, whereas in Christianity has brought not just the theology but also a worldview. Christianity was affected quite massively the history of philosophy as well. And so, if I had to guess, I'd say that perhaps Christianity may have been the turning point in that respect. The idea that what comes after is better, because of how the Christian theology is constructed. So Ryan asks, Angela, can you give my house an enchantment, but in a good way to help me fix it up faster? Well, I don't know. Um, So Guillermo is asking, has the resurgence of magical practice adopted the modern ideal of knowledge as something achievable by anyone that studies it? Does having magical exotericism and not magical esotericism? Mm. I'm not sure I understand your question. Are you asking whether the revival of magic is making it less esoteric and more public? If that is the question, I would say that that is the case, definitely. Now, magic is, well, of course, you still have esoteric practices and closed circles, whether it be covens or traditions or initiatory traditions. But overall, the practice of magic, not linked to specific traditions, and even the practice of magic linked to several traditions, most traditions even, tends to be, very open to the public. The knowledge, the esoteric knowledge, is now much more available. So in a way, it has made the esoteric exoteric, which means more public. But also, if we want to adopt the categories laid out by Berger, that means that they are not less esoteric. It is just that we are navigating reality in using different discourses. So we have an approach to reality which is esoteric in nature when we engage with magical practices, and an approach to reality which is exoteric when we um, don't engage with magical practices but with more secular manners. Hope that answers your question. Um, Gan Sean, sorry if I butchered your name, is asking, do you think the positivity movement among millennials, the pushback against any negativity, at least in public, is a covert belief in magic inspired by the idea of law of attraction? Mm, yeah, I think it is inspired by the law of attraction, but also it is not just that, because you also have, for example, self-help books and productivity authors that will also recommend you, um, have positive thoughts and engage with positive thoughts. Um, so I would say that, yeah, I guess it may be linked to the law of attraction to a certain degree, but also to the New Age movement more generally, and to now the productivity milieu and the self-help community. Even though they may not engage with esoteric practices, but they are more focused on productivity to, for your job in your career, they still tend to emphasize the importance of positive thinking. So it is very widespread at the moment. Uh, David, I know about the microphone, but I already, upped the volume input at the maximum level. So I don't know what else to do. There may be an issue with other settings, but it's not something that I can sort out at the moment, unfortunately. Uh, Michael or Michele, I don't know how to pronounce your name. I'm sorry. Doctor, where do the traditionalists like Julius Evola stand on the position that modern times are part of a degenerative phase of a cycle? Um, I will make a video on Julius Evola, uh, and because he's definitely an interesting figure of the 20th century. Um, but and yeah, he was influenced like many at the time by Eastern philosophy as well. So yeah, I can't recall on off the top of my head what he thought about the generative phase of a cycle. Mm. It may be possible that he would, because at the time it was a common thing to engage with the idea of the Kali Yuga from the Indian tradition. But yeah, honestly, I can't recall precisely at the moment. But stay tuned because I will make a video on Julius Evola at some point in the future. Andrew is asking, is the belief and practice of magic adaptive? That is, as the popular belief changes to be for or against magical practice, does magic find a way to survive? Sorry for the anthropomorphizing. So, yeah, the belief in magic appears to be adaptive and also very fluid because in different societies you find that across societies and across religions there seems to be always some kind of tradition or current or heresy that will include magic in some way or another. um, and it's also quite fascinating how certain things will resemble each other, um, even though they are different. I always advocate when something seems to be the same, but they have different names, dive deeper because you will definitely find the differences. And it is always important for me as a scholar to advocate for um, discovering the complexity and the nuances and uh, the differences, even when they are subtle, they still make a difference because they are articulated in that specific way. But yeah, I definitely believe that that magic is very is kind of a shapeshifter. Magic, you know, you have different cultures and different religions, but and yet still magic seems to be. Oh, thank you, James. Nice to see you, by the way. It's been quite some time since I last read one of your comments. I haven't forgotten you. It's just that at the moment I'm really, really busy with at work. But yeah, thank you for coming. Really happy to see you here, and you are amazing too. Ryan is asking, do you give online classes for college credit? Um, I don't at the moment. I am a lecturer at Literacy University, although my work on the channel is not linked to my work there, but it is, of course, part of my passion because the academic study of these topics is my passion and is something that makes me happy and gives me purpose. Um, it is something really meaningful to me, but I'm not sure whether I will do that in the future. But at the moment, I'm not. At the moment, I'm lecturing at the university in Leeds, and I'm doing YouTube, as you know. Then Azaroth says Evola had useful material, especially for shadow work, but one must remember not to adopt his nature of suspicion towards outgroups. Andrew says, thanks, that fits nicely into the modern aspect of magic being a hyper object. Yeah, this is something that we have been talking about in the Inner Symposium, in my Patreon community, about magic as a hyper object. By the way, Andrew here is the he's kind of the headmaster, and he leads he leads a book club in the inner symposium in the Patreon community. And I know that yesterday you had a you had a meetup. But yeah, I'm really happy about my Patreon community. It's growing, and I'm just really happy to have such amazing people, supportive and also very bright. So it's always a pleasure to read what they write in their discussions and to discuss with them or with you because some of you are there in the chat. Eman is asking, um, it's I guess a response to the negativity thing. Do you think there's a difference between facing negative facts and being negative? If so, do you think New Age positivity ignores the negative too much? Um, It's a bit difficult for me to answer because I cannot lump together all people within the new age. That would be an oversimplification. I know where you're coming from because there has been a discussion, especially in recent times, regarding regarding overemphasizing positivity and not allowing um, yourself to live through and thoroughly the negative thoughts and negative experiences which are also part of life. But I wouldn't say, I think that there was perhaps a trend at some point in that respect within the new age communities, but I don't think that that is the case anymore, at least not in my field experience. But yeah, I think that perhaps it is more like, you know, what happens, especially with the internet. Sometimes you get that the internet tends to polarize things more than reality does. So sometimes on the internet, it will seem as though certain things are just either or, but when you go into the community and listen to people and listen and witness what they do, then you realize that it's not as either or as you would have imagined. This is something that I've learned in my years of field work because as a human being, you will always have some kind of preconceptions when you go about to do field work, but then you always realize that when you are within a community, then things are always more complex and varied and um, different than just saying this or that. It is more like a spectrum. Um, SK says, what is the difference between Western occult and Indian? Do you know Indian occult? Well, actually, I started out at in my university career studying, being an Orientalist, as they say in Italian in Italy. So I was at first specializing in Indian and Tibetan traditions and religions, and I have learned Sanskrit and Tibetan. So I am familiar indeed with with Indian occult, but that is not one thing. Once again, it is something that is very complex. Uh, I'm particularly fascinated by um, the Vajrayana Buddhism, Tantrism, and yoga. I think they are very complex and they are infused with magical practices. So that it's definitely something that I want to cover in the future. I just need time. Oh, thank you, Eric. Thank you for your donation. In college, my lab partner and I built a radio telescope. The telescope was so temperamental that we decided to try to appease it by offering it burnt sacrifices by fried deities. It seemed to help. Really? That's fun. I remember, speaking of Indian philosophies, I remember that when I was studying Sanskrit at the university, I was having issues with my laptop, and I had just learned the Heart Sutra in Sanskrit, and the professor said that people who recited that specific sutra would believe that they sort of make the vibrations of everything that surrounds you higher. And so I started chanting the Heart Sutra to my laptop to see whether it would resurrect it. And after the second time, it turned on, and I said, "Wow, it really raised the vibration of the laptop." But yeah, that is a fun fact from my from my past, using Sanskrit sutras to revive laptops. So Darian Locke says, "Sorry for the double post. Just really curious, doctor. Is there any advice you would have for budding academics looking for traditionalist practices like Ptolemaic chemeticism?" Um, can you please expand more on that, Darian? I'm not sure I understand your question. Oh, David, I missed your question. Sorry. Is your singing intentionally enchanting? Of course. Yeah, Darian Locke, please expand more so that I can better understand your question. So, Paulina is asking, which are the main universities and scholars talking and publishing on the topic of magic? Well, there are lots and lots of scholars. It is not just one, and I wouldn't say there are main universities. There is the University of Amsterdam is pretty popular because it has, and also the University of Exeter. They have programs on esotericism, more specifically on the study of Western esotericism. But you do have, at least in the UK, I think that in the US is more rare to find courses on esoteric topics. But here in the UK, it is not as I mean, it does happen. You do have courses that will touch on esoteric topics. You don't have an entire program of study on that like they have in Amsterdam, but yeah, it is something that we definitely do. And also there is the pagan studies community at the AAR, the American Academy of Religion. So paganism is well studied at the moment, for example, and Western historicism also is gaining more attention on the part of scholars. And I hope that this will be more and more the case as time goes by. But yeah, I guess that if you want to get some names and some references, just look at the info box of my videos, because I always mention the references, and my references are always academic. So if there is a video, if there is a specific topic that you are particularly interested in, just look up the references and you will find the scholars that are publishing in that specific on that specific domain. Mm. Yeah, James says that for a while, many espouse toxic positivity. As I said, I think that at the moment there is more of a trend in calling out this kind of behavior within this kind of communities. So I think the trend is has reverted at the moment. That is what at least what I can see. Ryan is asking, I have to go, but love the show. You're great, and we're happy to learn from you. Oh, that's very sweet of you, Ryan. Thank you so much. David says you missed my question. Yeah, I think I was just scrolling through, and then I was able to catch it. later. But yeah, I hope I answered it. uh, so Jay is asking, please, to your knowledge, how old is the yogic tradition and how do you explain the adoption of Tantra, Yantra, and Mantra seemingly common to a magical practice throughout the world? This is not a question. This requires, a series of lectures to ask even to even start asking answering, I'm sorry, these questions. Thank you for asking, JM, but it's not something that I can really answer in a short uh, in a short manner. But stay tuned because, as I said, I will be covering yoga and tantra in the future on the channel in more depth. Darian, sorry, I was wondering if you had any sources you preferred for studies on Egyptian magic dating before the presence of Greece. Mm, I'm not sure. Perhaps leave it as a comment so that I can look it up at a later date. Where do you think magic stands in today's society? Like, what do you think is the purpose? Do you think it's returned to expand knowledge in the world, or is it just time for it to return? Ryan, I think that magic has different roles in society. Well, for once, since it seems to be surviving any or seemingly opposing religious system or cultural frameworks, it definitely plays a role in the lives of people. My guess would be that it may respond to um, the need of people to connect, to find connection that is not just limited to what the five senses allow you to see and perceive, and the sense of finding meaning and navigating reality in multiple ways and discovering what is hidden and liminality in our lives. So I don't think that magic is employed by practitioners just to find a boyfriend or a better job. I think that it is a meaningful way for them to engage with their reality in a way that it really, it is really meaningful to practitioners from what I gathered from interviews and my field work. It is not just a way of achieving things. It is a different way, expanded way, and to experience reality and to explore the liminal states and the liminal, um, realms of the world, if that makes sense. Thomas is asking, what is your biggest goal to achieve in the field of occult knowledge? I may sound very, I don't know. I my goal at the moment would be to, I guess, to have a stable position in the academic world, and then my aim will be to, I don't know, to expand the academic study of magic and to raise awareness that these subjects are studied in academia and that they may perhaps provide new tools for even for practitioners to understand and articulate their practices and to interact with secular or with other religious discourses that might appear or that might be in conflict with their belief system. So I think that knowledge is always power, and knowledge gives you, perhaps doesn't give you definitive answers. I don't quite believe in definitive answers. I believe in tools and in knowledge being a moving target that you always have to um, chase in a sense, but it is not really about finding the answer, but it is about the route that you take. It is about what happens along the way. That is what really changes you. Um, Eman says, do you think technology itself could have led to disenchantment? Yeah, that is what Max Weber said. Max Weber thought that disenchantment was also linked to the, um, the world becoming more and more technological. Although now it's TikTok and apps that on your phone that will allow you to check the moon phase or even construct a sigil or um, make a birth chart. So I don't think that it is playing a role in disenchantment really. Max Weber thought it would, but I don't think that it has disenchanted the word. I think that actually it is being employed. It is being employed as a re-enchantment tool. So David is asking, how does fear impact the practice of magic? That really depends on the tradition. Um, that depends on the tradition, because depending on the tradition, they will have different ways of articulating that. Well, I guess that I we can end the live stream now. I don't want to make it too long for those that will be watching it at a later date. But thank you so much for each and every one of you who joined the live stream. I always enjoy chatting with you guys, and thank you for those who made donations. Eric, James, and Thomas. It's really appreciated, and it really helps me keep the channel going. And if you have any questions that I wasn't able to answer, leave them in the comment section, and I will definitely answer them in the next few days. Uh, thank you, Thomas, for the second donation. I will definitely answer them in the next few days or as soon as I can. And what else did I want to say? I hope you enjoyed the lecture. Oh, thank you, James. Thank you for the donation. Um, so yeah, I guess this is it for today, and hope you liked it. And whether you are live or you are offline, please, if you like this video and this lecture and this live stream, smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, activate the notification bell, and please share my videos around. It really helps us grow and it helps me make more content for you guys. So please share my videos, and as always, stay tuned because there is so much academic fun coming next. Thanks for coming, guys. Bye.